All right. So we are live now.
All right.
What we're going to be talking about this time, for those of you who didn't read the title, is what makes a knife high quality. And I think like one of the main motivations for this is to give people sort of some insight on what to look for in a knife. Just when you're like, I don't know, in a store or looking online even, to like to sort of give you an idea like of what red flags to look for and what green flags. Is that a thing? I'm not sure.
I think green flag. We'll make green flags a thing.
All right, can we trademark that?
Quickly before
Yeah,
anyone else.
I don't want somebody to steal that idea. But yeah, so all right. But what I have here is an incredibly high quality, very, very well made $18 microscope. So that, you know, I can show, let's see, how do we...
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm seeing too much right now.
I know. So, you know, I can show people edges and stuff under the microscope. This is just an example of a knife that I've had for a while that, you know, you can see there's little nicks in the edge and stuff. But yeah, so that's what I'm going to be doing with that. But I've brought a lot of stuff home from my shop. You know, like different handles in different stages of completion, so that I can show people, you know, like examples of stuff that went wrong. Uh-oh. There's a piece of plastic that just appeared on my desk where a container used to be. That's not good.
Oh no.
All right. So give me a second. I'm just going to get some stuff up here.
Yeah, and we can actually talk through some examples. I mean, using different knives as examples or different issues that we've encountered as something to warn others about. I think that would be good as well.
Do you care if I name some of the knives?
Well, yeah, I mean, the knife is like you can't not name it.
Well, you know, one of the things that I find kind of appalling is that on the Konohishi, like the sheer number of things that were like awful was...
I'll let you finish, but I got a comment on that.
Well, I was just going to elaborate, well, not elaborate, like emphasize just how awful it is. But yeah, what were you going to say?
Now, see, what's interesting about it is, from my perspective, and this is just coming from a flipper's perspective, it's not easy for me to really see what you're talking about. So, like, at first glance, it does look like a good knife, but it sounds like there's some things that you see that would indicate otherwise.
Right, and I brought home examples of some of those. Now, somebody had asked if, you know, they could get a quick intro, just because, you know, they don't know who is talking. My name is Doug. I have a company called Squiggle Scales where I make handles and knives specifically for balisongs.
Yep, and I can introduce myself. So this is 50 Blades of Gray. Or you could just call me Eric, whatever you like. I have about 5 years of experience flipping balisongs. Have done different videos. Quite a number of videos, from just flipping to tutorials, and now I'm involved in some podcasts. So that's a very exciting time.
Truly the highest quality podcasts too.
I think we're up there. I think within the knife world, there's not a ton of podcasts.
I think Joe Rogan is looking our way a little bit nervously, like
really dominating that market share.
Yeah. So let me go through a few things. So there's like a few basic principles that are going to be relevant with a lot of stuff here, or for a lot of stuff. And let me just take some tools out of my little box of disasters. Um, so in relation to the construction, sandwich versus channel, right?
Oh
One
yeah,
of
so
the
what we talked about last stream. Yep.
one of the problems that you have with channel is you are stuck milling in from the side with a tool. Now, that might not sound like an issue, but the farther down on a tool it's cutting, the more it's deflected to the side. Okay? So what that means is if you don't have any sort of chatter, which I'll also show in a bit, it's going to be like a slight taper, like a V. Okay? So you end up with two sides that are not actually parallel. And that is a problem for handle play and stuff. And I'll just show you, here's, do I need a microscope for this? No.
I don't think so, because I think I know what you're getting at. So when you're getting towards where the tang and the handles meet, you're saying that the deeper that it goes, the problem is the tools start hitting the sides, and around that tang handle area, that's where you'd get the play.
Right, just because of that. Now, you could make an argument that when you tighten the screws down, it pivots about that, what would you call that little, like, webbing on the side? Like, where it's normally there's nothing in the channel, like the bottom of the channel, I guess. You could argue that, well, it would pivot around that, but still then now the tops are not parallel. And so it's just an all-around problem, in my opinion. So that's why I don't like channel balisongs. You can do something called chandwich, which is essentially, maybe I should get my little whiteboard up for this.
Yeah, that would probably help, because I know for some people that might not be familiar with all these terms, it might be a little bit difficult to wrap your head around it. Our last video, we do talk about some of these details a fair bit more. So if you do want to go back and look at some of those, that would probably help. But we'll try to do what we can to make sense of what we're talking about right now.
Actually, I am like the best teacher, so yeah. I'm just kidding. I'm actually pretty bad. So this is
I'm going with a light 3,
okay.
maybe a strong 4.
Awesome. So this is, if you look from the side, from the bottom of a channel knife, okay, this is what you get. Wow, that was actually pretty good, not gonna lie. And so you could say, well, it will pivot about this area down here. Can I highlight?
That'd be great if you could highlight.
No, that's the eraser. Okay. Nobody saw that. This area right here, it could pivot around this, but now these corners here are going to be closer together. Okay. And so that's also a problem. So it's like, even if you make that argument that you can make these parallel and get rid of that, you then have the outside to deal with. So that's that with the channel. Now what you can do, nice Control Z, yeah. So if you instead have this right here,
And I just want to clarify, and just to clarify, the top part is where the pivot would be making the most contact, or is it equal throughout, and therefore it actually be making more contact towards the bottom? I just want to make sure I'm understanding this right.
When you screw it down, these would end up parallel like this, and it would be theoretically about equal contact across this entire thing. But then you now have these sides that are not parallel. Like this is looking from, like the latch would be in your face and the pivot is about as far as it gets away. Okay. If that,
yep.
Right. So that's that. But if you put a cut right here and these now become two different pieces, then you have what's called chandwich. And with chandwich, I believe you can get rid of a lot of these issues, because now instead of milling from the side, you can rotate this. Actually, is there a way to rotate it?
Oh, that'd be fantastic.
Probably not. But you end up with a little thing like this. And so now your cutter, this is the side that it's cutting radially on, okay? The bottom, you're not going to have that same kind of deflection because it's an axial, like the cutting load is basically mostly axial. And so that's why I think that you can have the benefits of channel with Chandwich without having the negatives. That's that. Let's see.
Now, and that's interesting because that's just something that I don't think most people think about, where I really didn't consider that between channel and sandwich. I had more of a focus on, I guess, I don't know, maybe I'd be more concerned with, is it bearings, bushings, washers, whatever. But this is something that I suspect is less of an influence, but still interesting to consider.
Yeah, and
It's like that. It's a finer detail that basically this video is trying to get at.
that you would have no way of really knowing unless you sit there, unless you've had to deal with this problem, right? Like, it's not limited to ballad songs. Like, this deflection is a problem with everything, right?
Right.
And so it's just something that you have to deal with. One of the other problems that you're going to have, essentially, because there's cutting force involved and there's deflection, let's say that it bounces off of this side when it's cutting, like it, trying to cut here, it displaces it off to the left, but now it's cutting deeper over here, so there's extra cutting force, and when it rattles back and forth like that, that's called chatter. And it sounds like, calling it chatter does not sound like, oh, that doesn't sound like, that's not bad. Yeah, when you hear it, and then you go deaf, you start to not like it. I'm telling you, dude. Like, it gets old. In fact, let me see if I can find a video.
I'm gonna turn the volume down. Let's get a
Don't
audio
worry.
warning on the screen.
It won't be too bad, dude. If they're able to tolerate, I just searched channel. Why did I do that?
That's close
chatter.
enough.
Yeah, I only got 3 letters off. It won't be too bad.
I'm really just bracing for something awful. I feel like I'm being led down like one of those videos where like one of those jump scares. Like it's like looking at a field and then all of a sudden the camera just rotates real sharp.
Don't worry, it's not too bad.
Moments before disaster.
I know. Okay, I think this is probably going to show it. Let's see when he gets to it. Dude, this guy is slower than I am.
In the video?
That's chatter right there. Now, that causes all sorts of issues because what you end up with is it actually ends up wider at the bottom here. And it's not even smooth. You end up, do I have an example of chatter that's radial?
So basically, is this something that, I guess, how do I word this properly? So this is something that would be heavily reduced by a channel ballad song or a Chandwich. This whole,
yes, the problem would be less. So this is an example of chatter on a countersink bit. To show you what it's supposed to be like this, right? But when you have this, you can see these little radial lines are caused by the cutter like wobbling back and forth. And so this is something to watch out for, okay? If you see something like this in a hole, oh my God, okay. If you see something like this in a hole or something like that, it's not necessarily like somebody could easily look at that and think, oh, that's intentional, but it's not. And so if you see something like that, that's something that should be a red flag. Like, okay, it's not supposed to be like this. So what else has made it through the net or the quality control that really shouldn't have, right?
Now, see, this part's really interesting too, because again, these are just not things that I'm closely looking for. I do look for kind of issues with the quality that are in your face bad, but something like that probably could slip by me, because I would look at that and I'd be like, oh, it looks like a sunburst or something like that. Whereas now that I'm actually looking at it under the microscope, I'm like, I don't know, that kind of doesn't look nearly as clean as the other one that you had up on screen.
Right. Now let's see if I can get this. I'm going to actually just get it closer.
And like you're saying too, if that made it past the QC check, what else made it through the QC check? And it's not to say that, I guess I think it would be fair to say that just one of these things doesn't suggest bad quality. But if you start stacking up one after another, uh, you could make a better argument for that.
Right. Now let's see if I can. I don't know why I'm having so much trouble with this. So do you kind of see the lines there on that chamfer?
It's a little blurry.
It looks
Oh,
like
that's better. That's
little
better.
ridges. That's not chatter. That's just the actual cuts that the chamfer mill is doing. But that's a chamfer. That's not a countersink, right? So it's not the same. It's moving sideways to cut. It's not moving down to cut, unless you did
Right.
something wrong. So, you can see the tool marks that you get on the surface here. It should show up for you in a sec. And you can see essentially what the feed rate was with the cutter and stuff, with the little bites that it took. So, this finish right here, like that is essentially right off the machine. And that's not a problem, but it's something that you can see and be like, okay, this particular feature was done on a milling machine vertically, right? Let me think about something here. All right, I think this is probably a good transition point to something called witness marks, and you'll notice this on a konohishi. Okay, now I don't have a konohishi with me because one, I'm not really a fan of how it looks. Two,
Well, they do cost a lot. The accessibility is quite high. There's like a cult following around them.
right? Isn't it like $1,600 or something?
I think they're around 1,000 to 1,500, but they're just, I don't know. I have spent uh multiple hundreds, so I think the highest one I've spent on was 600, but man, once it starts getting up to 1,000 range, it's got to be borderline flawless at that point.
Or it has to have, something else to it, like my Mokutai and Damascus custom.
Oh, well, yeah, those are things that you could very easily start to justify.
Right. This, I will try to get the focus better here in a sec. So what you're looking at here Let's see if I can. Oh man, this is going to be difficult to see. So do you see that like weird flat transition point? It'll probably show up for you in a sec. I'll try to, let me get it about the middle of the frame. So like right in the middle of the frame, there's like a line that goes, 45 degrees left to right. That is called a witness mark. And what that is when the cutter enters the material, the sudden increase in load on the tool will cause it to move a little bit farther in because of like chatter. It's the same kind of effect, although it's not chatter. Right smack dab in the middle of the chamfers on the side of the Konohishi is a witness mark, I believe, on both sides. For a $1,600 knife?
Now that's the thing you're talking about. So that's the chamfer running down the tang of the blade. That's what we were just looking at.
No, on the handles.
Oh, that was the handle. Jeez, oof, oof, I was way off. Okay.
So let's see if I can get. Now this is an Alpha Beast, not a Konohishi. But do you see? I mean, I can't really show you the whole length, but I can assure you there is no witness mark on this chamfer that I cut on my sort of like custom Alpha Beast. Like I promise you there is no witness mark because, I mean, it's not difficult. Like it doesn't take skill. It just takes like not being lazy and actually setting up the code in such a way that it doesn't just be like, oh, okay, let me just start cutting in the middle. It's like, I don't know, like if you're going to go eat a cake, do you just like cut the center of the cake out first? It's like, no.
I mean,
well, okay, maybe.
I mean,
yeah, maybe.
But I do think it's interesting because again, this is just something that I don't really think about immediately. And while I don't think any of these things would immediately impact the flippability of a knife severely. It might like at a very, very tiny level, just in terms of quality and strictly speaking, high quality. If I was like a collector, these were definitely things that I would want to be knowledgeable about and know.
Right. That's kind of my goal, I guess, is it's like to give people an idea. Like when I look at a knife, I can relatively quickly figure out, I mean, at least to a rough degree, like how much thought went into the actual manufacturing of it, in addition to the design. But we talked about that in terms of like the CAD model and stuff, right?
Yeah.
But there's also just questionable decisions. Now, I don't know if this was aftermarket, but there was a slot on the underside of the Konohishi, which one is already too light on the handles, and it's already too thin on the handles, right?
So just to clarify there, are you talking about structural integrity?
No, I'm just talking about like for flipping.
Oh, okay. I was like, oh, geez.
No, for the titanium, it's not gonna. You wouldn't have that kind of a problem. This is another example, by the way. You can see inside. These are replicant handles, and these are my design. You can see inside that there's those milling lines. But I did this slot on the underside. Let me see if I can show you the end of the slot. Okay. So I do this milling on the underside because without it, the knife, like I would either have to make the handles thinner, which I kind of didn't want to do, or I would have to tolerate having like heavier handles. And because I am just an intolerant person in many ways, I decided, well, I'll just literally cut the guts out of it. So I did that.
I like the visual. I like the visual.
Right. Now, yeah, I'm good with analogies. He did this, except he did it on a knife that was already too light. So it's like, what's
now when you say light, because I don't know the weight specifications of anything on it really. I assume it's around the 5-ounce ballpark for the total weight. But what exactly are you?
I think it has like 1/8 inch thick handles.
So you're saying it might be a little bit blade heavy? I mean, like, because the problem,
Yeah,
I just haven't flipped one, so I'm actually just asking questions.
I don't
I'm
know.
actually curious.
I'm not like fantastic at flipping, but the distribution in weight between the blade and the handles was severely biased towards the blade, at least on the one that I received.
That's interesting. That is.
Now I was asked if that's considered skeletonizing. I'm actually not sure. I would say yeah, because it's, you know, cutting material out to reduce weight. But I suppose it depends on how you define it.
Yeah. I think some people have referred to. Jeez, can't even pronounce this correctly. Referred to skeleton. We're just gonna put at skeleton. That with just being like the holes down the handle. I've seen that be called that.
Right. I don't know if there are any good examples of it being done on the underside. Although it's not like I've invented the concept of milling a slot on the underside of a handle. Although I guess I could just claim that, right? I guess anything you hear is true, right? So I invented titanium a few years ago. But
Walk us through how you did that. Where did it begin?
I don't want to have to explain it. Shame on you for questioning me. But you can also see, do you see this little dark line that goes all the way around the slot?
Okay, so we're looking at, okay, this is the underside. This is the part that has been milled out for weight reduction.
Yes. Let me see if I can get some pictures up of some of the knives. Just so that I can sort of give you something to like orient yourself. Hopefully this stream doesn't get lower quality here, just with me downloading all the pictures. So Taters asks, the Matrix milled undersides also, or has milled undersides also. Do you have to mill the bottom of the frames and then the top, or can you do it all in one go? For the vast majority of things, you have to do one side or the other first. Unless you are like you're doing something where the underside features can be done with a tool from the top side, and there are like undercut, you know, milling cutters that you can use for different like things. Unless you have that and it's a very specific application, then you would have to do it in multiple operations, which is part of why doing a slot like this is an expense that I would otherwise not have to make necessarily. With hidden Zen pins, I would. But, you know, flipping it over and doing another operation is something that a lot of people don't want to do. It's the argument that BRS made for the not doing hidden Tang pin cups on the Alpha Beast.
I still want those to come back. I want them back.
Well, the thing extra. Is, they can do
extra.
that. They can do that from the top. So them saying that they can't do it from the top is incorrect. They would just need to use a T-slot cutter, and then they could do that. It would not be an issue. I don't know that I have any good pictures of the undersides. Yeah.
So while you're looking for a better kind of example to show us, what other off the top of your head mistakes that are obvious to you, or maybe not mistakes, but things that signify kind of cutting corners? What was something that comes to mind in addition to what we've talked about?
A lack of chamfers. So that's what I was trying to describe here on the side, is these dark lines going around. Those are 45-degree chamfers that I've cut. And on the underside of the Konohishi, the slot that I had seen was complete. Like there was no attempt to deburr it. Like you'd cut your finger open on it. And
See, now, okay, that's interesting. That's very interesting because and I actually wasn't sure if that was what we were looking at here, that specific point. So that entire part that's been milled out on the other side of this handle, on that entire, I guess, rim, that has a 45-degree chamfer on it.
yep.
Interesting. That's very interesting. Yeah.
Yep, and it's expected, frankly. Well, okay. Not having a chamfer doesn't mean it's not well done. If you look at stuff that Squid has done, he tumbles a lot of his stuff, so he doesn't need to chamfer it, right? It's just
Right.
another way of accomplishing the same thing, which is to not leave a jagged edge on something you're charging hundreds or over $1,000 for, right? You know, it's just, it's common decency. So you can see.
Well, and it's just,
go on.
oh, I just want to finish on that point because it's something that I wouldn't immediately think about, but it kind of is one of those things that just signifies doing that extra step, going that extra mile in making sure that the knife really speaks to a certain standard.
Right. Which it's like, again, that's been my strategy the whole time, is just to like make stuff that's like speaks for itself. Like I feel like such a dweeb if I go around and I'm like, have you heard about the awesome new squiggle scale? It's like, that's ridiculous. Like me saying it's good doesn't make it good, right? You have to know what to look for and what to watch out for at the same time. Now, and this is something that, you know, talking with Kusky about, we both made the same mistake and discovered the same thing the hard way, which is if you put too big of chamfers on the Zen pin holes, then the Zen pin shoulder won't contact the underside of the handle. It'll contact the chamfer. So it will actually be able to move up and down. So if you do that, especially if it's a knife that doesn't have hidden Zen pins, it's scrapped. You can't, because when you try to tighten the screws down, it'll just pinch on the blade.
Yeah.
Right. So now I would say it should be scrapped even if it's hidden Zen pins, just because you don't want that extra play there. You know, but that's that. Now, if you look around the pivot here, you want this area, it doesn't necessarily have to be flat, okay? But you want to try to have it be as even as possible, which is why I have some overlapping cuts. Because if that's not flat, then it's going to cause problems as far as handle play goes, right?
So again, we're looking at the underside of the handle right now. So you're saying
this is the top side. I just flipped it over, but yeah, the stuff that's on stream right now, I think, is the.
Yeah, I got a little bit of a delay on my end.
Mm-hmm. So, do you see all this like flashing or something? That's a burr that's built up from that cutter, and you can see it not so coincidentally lines up with those, you know, milling lines, because it's a burr that's been pushed up by the cutter. Now, this is not a finished product. This is literally like, it's just been gone over when I did the sides. And so it's like, because I'm the one that's going to be the only one handling it, I don't deburr everything just because like I know what I'm going to cut myself on and what I won't, right? But for a customer, dude, if you shipped that and it had like a massive burr, it's like, dude, that's unacceptable. And so it's something to watch out for.
Now, have you seen any examples of that? I don't think I've run into any examples. I mean, I've had some not good quality knives, that's for sure, and I've encountered them. But have you seen this specific issue on anything? And it doesn't even have to be you handling it. Just have you seen photos on the internet?
Well, I mean, that's what I was describing with the Konohishi.
Oh, so that had that problem?
Yeah, it's the same issue. Like, this is what you would be trying to get rid of with those chamfers. That's
Oh
the
wow.
burr that gets pulled up or pushed up, however you want to, say it. And that is problematic. Here's
Yeah,
Shiv
it's
Shack's.
just that just one more thing that kind of, and again, it's just for me, it's just a lot to take in because I'm not actively looking for these issues. I'm looking for more blatant in your face issues, like if holes are misaligned, like that's pretty bad. But or maybe if the one thing that aggravates the hell out of me is if you look from the top down at the spine of the blade, if one chamfer is way leaning over the other.
That's a
I
major red flag, by the way.
Yes, and I've had that on one particular knife. Actually, I'm looking over at my knife. I'm trying to make sure if it's actually just one. I'm pretty sure it was just one that had an egregiously bad chamfer like that.
Right, and the reason why that's such a red flag is because that chamfer was likely not the only thing that was done in that operation, right? So whatever else it was milling, it also did way too deep, right?
Right.
So that could be chamfers on the pivots, and if you're using bearings or something, God forbid, um, like that could cause issues, especially over time if you depends on where it's contacting stuff. But that could definitely cause issues. I also do 3D chamfers on all my holes, which you don't need to do, but it's something that it just makes sure that you at least don't have like a built-up burr there. Um, and it takes a little bit of extra work, like doing the tool path, but it's not that big of a deal. And all this crud in the holes also is something to watch out for. Like, if it's a really dirty, messy handle, um, other stuff could have been skipped. You
Oh,
don't.
it's like well, that doesn't fall into deburring, does it? That part that you're talking about there.
Yeah, that is. You're removing the
Oh,
burr
it is.
that goes over the hole. Well, I'm trying to see if I can find an example here, although I don't know if I'll be able to. I brought a lot of different handles home.
And just so at some point I do want to talk about this, so I just want to plant the seeds now. I think it would be good to touch upon knives that you've seen. It doesn't have to be a ton, but and probably production knives would probably be the best examples that have, from what you've seen, to make moves towards having a higher quality standard.
Like,
Or
you're asking about knives that I think are improving.
like no, I mean just ones that as you've seen so far are at that higher quality threshold compared to say because so far we've just talked about the was it Konoashi?
Kanahishi.
Konoishi, yeah. So far we've just talked about that as an example. We've talked a little bit about the milling that you've done and the work that you've done, but maybe some knives that people right now can go online and look at examples that have, from what you've seen, uh, kind of indicators of quality versus what we've what we've just talked about.
Yeah, let me see if I can find some examples. And you can keep talking or whatever. I'll be looking for a bit.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think because I know for a lot of people, probably hearing this doesn't do much good if we can't pull some examples and refer to those as kind of the maybe not benchmarks, but at least some baseline that they can look at a knife and say, okay, that particular model made some good choices in terms of quality, or that one was good here, not so good there. Just something that people can look at. Um, as opposed to just kind of the theoretical side of it. Because with the flipping podcast we had done, I think we did a good job pulling some examples of knives that are popular, some that are a little bit more rare, and kind of tying in together the different factors that would make it a good flipper. So I kind of think it'd be great to capture that same perspective here in terms of quality.
So I don't know that I can point out like something and say like, oh, that's really good, because it's more a matter of like what stands out that's bad. Like, and I just did some looking here, and I've got this, and I don't know. Yeah, it's a Baron Sun. Do you see up by the tip of the knife here how the bevel is all of a sudden at a jagged angle and it gets wider?
So it's still loading for me. I
Yeah.
got just a teeny delay, but I think I know where this is going.
Um,
Okay, so
what that means is either the blade all of a sudden got thicker, which it shouldn't in that manner. Like with Bowie blades or Bowie blades, you will a lot of times see that it gets thicker near the point, such as on this one. I should probably show people. And I'm just showing the knife that I had, shown before. It gets thicker up near the tip compared to down here. That's just because there's extra material, right? And you can see where that swedge is, or the scalloping, right? It should not be at some weird angle like on this one. Like that, immediately either they don't have decent quality control as far as sharpening goes, or they don't care, or they don't even know. But that's another thing to watch out for, I suppose.
Now I do think it's worth putting into context here. The Baron Sun, those are kind of on the very budget friendly side. So I guess,
but you see it with all sorts of knives.
Yeah, but I guess so with a grain of salt on that one, but as you're definitely climbing up in price, that's something that you wouldn't want to see.
You wouldn't want to see it on anything.
Yeah.
Like if
so you're even saying for the price, that's something that can be avoided.
I mean, if you're in a store and you're looking at knives and there are a selection of cheap knives, yeah, don't just be like, oh, well, it's a $15 knife, so I don't care if they have a better one of this identical knife. Like, find the one that has the fewest issues.
That's a good point.
But there's other issues with this, right? It's got the pin construction, so it's just inevitably going to get greater and greater handle play.
Yeah, I never understood the fascination around, and I don't even think we bothered to talk about that. Probably would have been worth mentioning, but to me, that is really just an indication of a lower quality knife. I've seen it on more costly knives too. I have, and I even bought one that was $350. I think it was called the Roton Monarch, and this is one that not as many people probably know about. It's I found it from video from like 7 years ago, and I was like, oh, that's a pretty cool looking knife, and I was like, I gotta have it. And boy, were there a lot of issues with the quality on that knife. And for $350, that's when it's like, boy, oh boy.
Right. I definitely think if you see an expensive knife that has like really major flaws, even if it's just one model, like one example of it, like there will be other issues. Like there just will. Like you won't have just one issue like that.
Well, and
Right.
I think pin construction is an indicator because the reason why I brought up the Roton is because it had pin construction handles, and so I think now that I know more about ballad songs, it's really just an indication of, it's, in my opinion, it's cutting corners. Now that I know a lot more, I
Right.
don't know why you wouldn't want to seek the best tolerances you could, other than,
It's just price point.
yeah, that could be part of it too, making compromises, but I guess at that point, it's like, well, what compromises can be made versus which ones should not be made. So, which corners, or maybe that's the wrong way to word it. What are non-issues versus what are critical issues?
Um, I would say like, okay, so here's one thing. Like, I like if the bevel is the same thickness the entire way, but that's not a critical thing, right? And especially if you're flipping, it could actually be beneficial to have the extra material behind the tip,
Right.
right? And so that's definitely not a deal breaker. I think material selection both can and cannot be, or should and should not be, a deal breaker depending on the context. These are cast zinc handles, okay? When they contact that Tang pin, it's like one of them's winning that fight, and it's definitely not the zinc handles,
Oh, for sure, no. And
right?
actually, I'm glad you brought this example up too. So that's one part of it. So, and I, of course, I had a Baron Sun 114. Basically the same model we're looking at, just with a different Bowie blade. And over time, that Tang pin just ate away at the zinc handles, and it leaves a bad taste in your mouth. And you say to yourself, okay, it's $30, but at the same time, it's like, well, would it have hurt them just to do Zen pins instead? Could that have been done? And maybe the problem would still develop, but maybe a little bit more slowly. I don't really know.
It's a cost thing. Those are channel handles, and they're cast, so you couldn't really
Yeah,
get
yeah.
Zen pins in there. Somebody did ask, would you consider a Bally with Phillips head pivots cheap versus Torx? Yeah, I would not buy a knife that had Phillips head screws under any circumstances. Like, Torx is and has been the standard for knives for, I mean, as long as I'm aware of it being a thing, right? Um,
Yeah.
am I insane?
No, I don't think I've ever been too interested in a ballast song that's featured uh what Phillips heads. I don't see it a lot though. Seen one example of it, and that was it. And it didn't do so hot.
Yeah, Phillips head is a problem. Um, like, it's not a good drive system, or driver system. Like, it's, when you're using a screwdriver and it jumps over one of the little lobes,
Yep.
skips. That's called camming out. Okay, because if you look at the underside of that screwdriver, it's an angle. It's not like Torx where it's a vertical side, right? So
Hmm.
the force is not just, tangential. It's like also axial. Like, it's trying to push it out and get it to strip.
Right.
Yeah, but material selection, I also think people should, is a very real topic. Okay, now I am obviously biased towards titanium. Like, I feel like I'm that little kid that's dressed up as a zombie, and the with the face paint, and the journalist is like, "Oh, what do you such and such," and like ask him about Halloween. He's like, "I like turtles." And it's just, dude, I gotta bring that up. I feel like I'm like that. I'm just like, I like titanium. Um,
It's a nice metal though. I mean, I guess, and you did kind of put the caveat in there. It really depends on how it's used. Although I really don't think I could make too many arguments for the cast zinc being used.
yeah.
I'd be really trying hard on that one to make a good case for that material.
All right, I'm gonna show. this video.
Back here live at the
I love
Waterfront Village with my friend, the zombie, Jonathan. You're looking good. Jonathan just got an awesome face paint job. What do you think?
I like turtles.
All right, you're great zombie. And good times here.
So that's me, except I like titanium. So I'm biased, so keep that in mind, okay? But for blade materials, it's like I'm less biased. It's like I just want it to be high quality, and there are a lot of decent quality blade steels. For the handles, it depends on a lot of things. Like you should really never use aluminum with Tang pins.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. I mean, there's so many examples. Really, there's no excuse for makers in today's time to make the handles out of aluminum and use Tang pins. I know they can still flip fine. I'm well aware of that. But it's just it seems like such an oversight to me that you to make that compromise is silly. To make the compromise of the knife being a little bit cheaper just so that it could have aluminum handles, or maybe like, I don't know. Whatever other feature is being prioritized over the handles needs to be flipped the other way around.
Right. I think it's people not understanding the consequences of their design decisions. And an example, and I don't want to speak ill of him because he's a friend of mine, but Shankles. On the Shankles trainer, he had used aluminum for liners, and inevitably and without fail, every single one of them developed fatigue cracks and broke. And people were like criticizing him and stuff because he just left the community. It's like, what is he supposed to do? Just continually buy new liners for the next 3 decades? Like, I understand that people are upset, but it's at the point now where if you're buying a Shankles trainer, it's like you can't say, I wasn't aware. It's like, no, you knew what you were buying. You can't now be outraged and start trashing Shankles. Like, you knew what you were buying, right?
I think that this would be a good topic for this could actually be a whole topic by itself, because kind of there's been a lot of examples of I guess reactionary I guess what's the best way to word it? Just really reactionary responses. What a great way to word it. But even just kind of interactions between makers, interactions between flippers. There's been some interesting cases. The Shankle one has definitely been a very interesting case. My perspective, and not to dwell it on too much, I think there could have been a little bit better communication, but there's definitely something to be said for beating a dead horse, and that might be an example of beating a dead horse.
Well, that's something that the Balisong community does, like, all the time. It's like, and especially on Reddit. Like, I don't like Reddit at all for a lot of reasons, but I mean, certainly one of them is it seems to just be, for whatever reason, it attracts people who want to feel smug or are smug. They don't necessarily want to be, but it's like they all join this like hive mind, and it's like if you disagree with it, you're suddenly an idiot. It's like that's not how it works.
Actually, we can tie this into this conversation about quality because it does affect it. So one thing that is very interesting about this is that kind of cult-like mentality that you're talking about, it has caused certain makers to get away with some very questionable design choices.
Is it who I'm thinking of?
This isn't any specific person. When I say there are, I mean there is. There are multiple cases of this.
Well, I think one of them is definitely, it's more of a cult following than others, at least in my experience.
We can name names. We don't have. We can, and we don't have. I'm not opposed to saying, but I guess what I'm saying.
No, I'm leaving it up to you. I was just curious for my own reasons.
I'm saying without naming names, and we can do it later and really kind of discuss through some of these examples. There's been examples of people that basically been ostracized as well for it. Um, I think one that came to mind, and this is just one of many to keep that in mind. Was if you're familiar with someone, I think it was Will Moon is the name.
I recognize that name.
And I think the controversy there was around mods. I'm pretty sure that was where the controversy was. He might have been making ballad songs, but I'm not 100% sure. But I think for a time period there was a cult following, and this is when I think his popularity was tapering off as I was joining the community, and really it sounds like basically it was cult following, and then as mistakes were made, and they weren't being fixed, they weren't being acknowledged, it just went straight down the toilet for the guy in terms of ballad songs. And now when I hear the name, it doesn't really evoke positive thoughts in terms of quality. There are other examples. What we have Matt Cat Mo Oh, okay. So, yes, I know who you were referring to. I would say Cook does have a bit of a cult following. There have been some things that I've seen on some finished knives that I wouldn't be thrilled about. Now I know there is the aspect of the handmade being involved in there, so that's something to consider. It's not really for me, but he's definitely a person I think it'd be fair to say that he's familiar with controversy, um, and that's one where there is a cult following there as well. I would say I would even put, to a degree, I would put a maker like DDR into that category. I know he had done a revised version of the Archangel. I don't really know why fully, other than it was just popular and people wanted it, and Cold Steel was not going to bring it back, as far as I could tell. Where there's really this cult following, and to me, that kind of can shield a maker from certain criticism that is otherwise valid. It is otherwise valid in my opinion, and yet because of it, it's almost like it's almost like for that cult following, they're okay with these certain things because that's, I guess, just for them, that's the product they're looking for. Their demands are being met, and it's almost like really, it almost kind of comes down to, well, maybe you're just not that person's customer. I don't know if that's the best compromise there, but I think that's something to consider. Where, hey, look, if it's working for these other people, it's not working for you. You just push on. Like maybe that ain't the knife for you. Maybe that ain't the maker to purchase from.
Yeah. I think that there are a lot of people who, I don't like people who spend all of their time going around marketing and building up a cult following specifically so that they don't have to actually have a quality product. Like they're
Well,
counting on being defended.
some people get lucky with it too. I mean, consider if a YouTuber, any YouTuber, just decides to start posting ballad song videos, and they decide that they really, really like one particular knife. They just get attached to it emotionally, or whatever. And in realistic terms, it's really not a great product, but they just kind of, that sentimental value thing. If enough people kind of start watching it, start following it, they can just make the association in their head that, well, if that person's using it, it must be good, and not really taking into consideration some of these other factors. It's kind of that popularity bias where just because it has a million views, and I think this is really speaks so much to why the CS:GO style knife really is so so ubiquitous is because of that popularity bias. It's seen almost everywhere. And so to someone who is just coming into the community, they might make the association that, oh, popular means good. If it's popular, it must be good. Surely this is, I think it starts going down that path. And so some of these makers can find themselves in that situation where someone just kind of popularizes it, and then all of a sudden they're the new kid, the new hot kid on the block.
Right.
I mean, I've seen it happen. That's kind of what I'm really getting at is I almost wish that someone would make a timeline of when makers started and stopped, because I think if you did that, you would see that there was a very high surge in that cult following that we're talking about, or that popularity, followed by a pretty rapid decline. And I mean, I've seen it over the 5 years, different makers kind of, and again, not we're going to beat the dead horse a little bit, but I think Shankle Song is a good example of that popularity kind of actually turning against someone very badly. So I think the rise to popularity with Shankle Song was that it was kind of like an alternative to a replicant, or an alternative to some Squid Battle songs. And so it was like very exciting that this maker came along, but it's almost like a victim of, becoming too popular too quickly, because then when something went wrong, all of a sudden it went really wrong because everyone had their eyes on that maker, and everyone was like, all right, time to say something. Even though for him, it was like a very, that's a rough wave of popularity to ride, especially on the downside.
Yeah. One thing to watch out for, just back to knife construction. The holes that are drilled, you want to be parallel or perpendicular, I guess, depending on how you're looking at it, to the handle. And the reason is, if you don't, then you end up with essentially it forces the handle, like it puts the handle under stress, right? Because each side, like the sex bolt or the pivot, is trying to go off at like an opposing angle to the other side, right? So that causes problems not only with fitment and stuff like that, but also in terms of handle play. And so it's not something that, that's not necessarily something that you can see. Actually, you can't, okay? But it's something to be aware of as a potential problem when you're looking at something, right? When they did this design, and maybe I guess this might not even be useful, just because I don't know that most people would recognize how something was drilled. But that would be another problem with the channel design, right? Is once you tighten it down and the tops are, or I guess you could say the sides are no longer parallel, neither is the hole. Right?
It's pretty interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's something. I mean, because it's hard for me to grasp, like something more immediate, and it kind of came to mind while you were talking about that, is when the bottom of a handle is very uncomfortable in terms of it's got sharp corners, and it might not be sharp enough to cut you, but when it hits your hand, and especially if it hits you like a knuckle or a bone, you are made well aware of the fact that corner exists, and it is very uncomfortable. That's something to me that comes to mind very rapidly as a flipper, that would kind of indicate someone not bringing that knife to the higher quality that it could have been. Where with this is a little bit more theoretical to me. It makes sense, but I guess from that flipper perspective, it is a lot to wrap my mind around for this particular point.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's one of those things that's ever really going to change. I guess it's one of those. That's, I guess, where the reputation of the maker starts to, like, you have to rely on it, I suppose. I don't know what the right way to say it is. But you have to trust the maker. So that's that, I suppose. Hole size, like diameter, is definitely another issue. And this is, in a lot of ways, like a lot of applications, you have to watch out for this. Okay, the Zen pin fit can be too tight, too loose, and being too loose, you can start to have issues with the handle gap. The pivot, it can be a similar kind of thing, but not to the same extent. The pivot, you would start having handle play issues, more so than like handle gap issues. But you also have to consider that the hole on the blade, where the bushing is going into, like, that needs to be a reliable diameter. And so instead of using a drill like this to finish the hole, you use something called a reamer, which goes in and makes the sides and everything. It's just a lot more precise. And your selection of a reamer it has a big impact. Like, the difference between like a snug fit and like a good fit for my replicant handles is about 0.005 of an inch in diameter. Right.
Now here's a good question. Here's a good question for you, and I think this actually could actually be a good point as well. This is kind of talking about from maker, from factory type perspective. But when it comes time to, say, like, replace a washer, how much of an impact could something like that have in terms of, like, let's say you're buying, because this does happen regularly. Let's say you're buying secondhand, and this is where you can start getting into maybe things to consider when you are buying secondhand that could be issues. Maybe not. They're not going to be. I don't think any of these are going to be like terrible issues, but like, say a washer was replaced, how much of an impact could that actually have on the tolerances, or even would it be that much?
Let me see if I can show you really quickly. Because I had gotten a little screenshot, I just forgot to grab it for this. But I'd like made a screenshot. So give me a second. Great. I don't know if this is gonna work. So here's the deal. I'm just gonna assume it's not gonna work, but I'll keep trying. The washers on your standard balisong are 16,000ths of an inch thick on each side, right? And if you consider I think this should do it. It's gonna have to work. But I just put a diagram up. You should see it in a bit. But these washers, you can see that there's 16,000ths of an inch clearance, and that's technically, there's probably a very small amount more. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to rotate. Like I had said in the previous stream, like, you have to have some level of clearance. But a small change in the thickness of the outside of the washers is going to have a huge impact on handle play. Is that kind of what you were asking?
Yeah, because, you know, when buying secondhand, I think this is definitely a fear that I've had, and the reason why I've bought so few balisong secondhand is because you can't really know what you're getting at that point. If something's been replaced, it's a little bit more, you know, that's not something that you'd easily be able to tell was replaced or that was even wrong. So you might attribute it to oh well, that knife is not good, when in reality that quality issue could have been something that was done by someone just maintaining the knife improperly.
Yep. Well, I would say if you get new washers, like for the most part, you're probably gonna be fine, because it, like, at worst you're restoring it to what it like came as, like to the original buyer. But you know, like there are like fitted washers and stuff. I don't really buy into that. I think to the same extent that a lot of other people do. I think that there are so many other sources of handle play that sitting there like trying to hand fit washers is kind of ridiculous because you go on.
You know what's all the rage these days?
What
Stacked washers.
is that
Let me
actually a
get
thing?
it is if the knife is really bad. So there have been a couple pictures I've seen online, and it's almost always it is always the cheap knives, where sometimes they'll come with 2 to 3 washers stacked somewhere on one of the 4 uh, sides of the sandwich, and you just look at it and you're like, wow, how was that not caught?
Yeah, I don't
But
know.
but I do see what you're saying, and I've never really subscribed to it either. The whole fitting washers. I think it's a mod service that is probably the equivalent to like when a car dealership's really trying to push a service that you've never really heard of and no one else has really heard of when you ask them. That type of deal. It's like, yeah, you might need it sometime eventually, possibly, but yeah, like it's not going to fix. It's probably not going to fix the problem that you think it's fixing.
Yeah, but what I was saying is like you don't even know whether or not the handle play that you're experiencing is due to the washers, right?
Yeah, it's
Like,
like a placebo. Like you think that's the problem,
or
and
you're making it worse because it's not actually the source of the handle play.
that's true too.
Like that's what I would say is the bigger problem. Like it's a lot more likely that the blade thickness is not quite right, or the washer thickness is not quite right. I'm sorry, the bushing thickness is not quite right. Um, I've never really found issues with the washers, and I've measured them with micrometers, not calipers. So I guess I'm not convinced about the washer argument. I think a lot of times people just make stuff up. Like I think a lot, like I still don't understand why people think that this would work, but I guess to some extent it does. But they'll just say something as if it's true when it's actually just a theory, and they have no basis whatsoever and no credentials whatsoever to actually be arguing that theory, right? And so,
Well, walk us through an example. Like, I know we just talked about washers, but walk us through an example that kind of really would exemplify that.
um,
Putting you on the spot.
well, no, I'm trying to think of a good example. I mean, I think tap is actually a good example to some extent. And the reason is it's because people don't understand what tolerance stack is, right? Like, and they also probably are not good at math, like geometry, like visualizing
Oh,
it.
shots fired.
Okay.
Shots fired.
And I think
Call me.
I'm just saying how I think of it. So that's, but if you have a very small change at the very close to the center of a triangle, when you expand that out, right? I think they're called congruent triangles or whatever, right? You have a much bigger displacement. Okay, and that's if you assume no flexing whatsoever. Okay, and there will be flexing, not just because the material will flex, but you're also going to be able to compress the area like up by the washer, Like, you will be able to. It's just a question of how much. And so people will be like, you know, there's absolutely no excuse for tap on a $300 knife. And the first thing is, a $300 knife is not as expensive as it seems. Okay, when it actually comes to making a titanium handled knife with like a decent blade material and everything, that is not a cheap thing to make. And so it's, and the more specific you are, the tighter tolerances you hold, the more expensive it gets, to the point where like it will rapidly increase in cost, just because like all of a sudden now you're making it so someone has to put something on a completely different machine than they otherwise would have to, because you have such tight tolerances. And so you end up with tolerance stack. The blade might be slightly too thick, slightly too thin, right? The washers maybe are slightly too thin. The bushing is maybe slightly too thick, right? By each of those, by a 1/4,000th of an inch, which is much, much smaller of a distance than you probably think it is. Okay, like that's 2.5 10,000ths of an inch. If you add all those up in like on one end of those that tolerance range, you very, very quickly end up with a lot of extra handle play, right? So go on.
Yeah, it sounds like sometimes it's just people, they know. Okay, so it sounds like they're aware that something exists, but they really don't know how to diagnose it, and it really ends up spreading some false perceptions about knife tolerances, and even honestly, I think it would even spread false perceptions about knife quality.
Right. Well, and it's like, and this goes back to the Reddit thing. I think it's a problem where people, like, something is just viewed as not good by some given group, and to be like, to fit in the group, you have to also agree that it's not good. And it's like, first off, I don't care about your group. Okay. Second, you're wrong. Right?
I think that's the more important piece, where it's like, why are you choosing to die on the hill of objectively not understanding the problem? Why is that the hill that you're dying on? Because to me, to kind of explore the topic a little bit further and ask the questions of, okay, well, what's really causing it? What's really the problem here? It kind of really helps narrow down, okay, well, maybe tap isn't really, the knife itself having tap might be more of a reflection of, and this is even something, sometimes people will automatically out of the box start messing with the tolerances of a knife.
Because they're confident, like they think that they understand it better than they do. It's similar to fountain pens. People will mess with the nibs. Like, they'll grab pliers, and it's like, holy shit. If you're reaching for the pliers with a fountain pen, like, take a pause, sleep on it, and come approach it the next day. Like, it's one of those things, in my opinion. But go ahead and go on.
I really didn't have too much to say there. I thought an interesting point about the increase in cost as the increase in quality goes up is that it's almost like as a buyer and as a buyer, you have to understand exactly what you're looking for, or maybe not exactly what you're looking for, but have a ballpark, because I almost imagine it. I don't know if these are great examples, but I just thought the cars were cool. Is like the difference between what is it, a regular standard model Dodge Challenger versus the Demon. Like,
they both suck, right?
I thought the Demon's pretty cool.
I'm just being a dick.
It's pretty cool. It's pretty cool, man. And
the GT500 is still cooler. I'm sorry.
I'm not gonna take offense to people liking different cars. I actually, that's not even my. We're not gonna go into my favorite car discussion. We're not going down that road. What we are gonna do is say that those two models are targeted at very different buyers. I mean, the person that's buying the demon isn't going to be buying the regular challenger. Maybe they would, but I would put it as unlikely. And likewise, the person that's buying the challenger probably can't afford the demon, or maybe they can, but they're really frugal with their money, or whatever the case may be. They're two very different products, even though they're that same overall look.
Right. And it also is a similar thing. Like, unless you know what to look for, you wouldn't necessarily be like, oh, at this horsepower, you need to now upgrade the drive shaft, right? It's like you would, like, I'm sure, well, I'm not sure, but I'm almost sure the drive shaft in those two cars at those two tiers is completely different.
I'm not sure. I'm going to go with probably. I actually
I'm not positive, right? Like, I guess it depends on how expensive it is to create one that's able to withstand the higher forces involved. Because if it's not much more, then you would just have them be the same. But it's one of those things that, like, all of a sudden now you're adding expenses. Like, if you look at the cost of the I don't know, the NVIDIA Titan X, and this is from many years ago, okay? The Titan X versus the GTX 980. Like, the price difference is like $400 or something, right? The performance difference is not necessarily that great. The difference between the GTX 980 Ti and the Titan X is essentially nothing, but you still have a difference of $300 or something. Like, I don't know. I don't remember all the exact prices, but you're paying a ton of extra money for almost no gain, right? So,
and just to clarify, because I think I know what terms are being talked about right now. I imagine some of the people in the stream do, but you're referring to computer parts right now, and sounds like a graphics card.
Sorry, like I meant graphics card. It's like, if you need that extra performance or you want it, then it's worth it to you, right? And that's what it's there for. But when you start demanding less and less and less handle play, you can't then start complaining as the price increases, right? It's like you don't just, it doesn't just get better for free, you know?
Oh, and this is another thing that could be a whole topic on its own. I think is the sticker shock is what I would describe it as. The sticker shock that people have when they look through battle songs, and they end up being like, well, what makes that one? Why is that got to be 300 when I can find this one for 90? And it's like, okay, yes. Yes, that one does cost triple. But in the same argument, it's like, okay, well, what's the difference between a $1 steak and a $9 steak? Like, are we having the same conversation here, or are we just going to pretend that knives are its own special thing that's unaffected by a rise in quality? That a rise in quality is probably going to mean a rise in price, and it's not always the case. There's plenty of examples where price does not reflect an increase in quality, but I would say the trend line is that as you increase in price, the quality will too as well. I think there is a plateau that occurs, and I think the plateau, I would say the plateau for production battle songs is around, I want to say you really start to level off around 500, but you're talking about a production knife, and there's certain expectations with it. I don't want to be buying $1,000 production knife, because at that point I'd just be getting a $1,000 custom knife. I'm just not going to buy $1,000 production knife. I'd settle for a mid-tech style, but that's kind of where I would say price point wise in today's time, $500 for a production knife is probably going to be where it starts to plateau, where at that point the company making the knife has enough room to play with to make design choices that are going to be a really good combination of quality and let's say it is for flipping, quality and flippability.
Right. And I definitely think like that's one of the things with me. Like I charge $300, $275 starting out for some of the handles that I'm making. And it's like I charge that because of how much time I put into it and how like I have extremely high standards. Like I'll scrap parts that actually, without naming names, there are some people that are very popular on Reddit who I was shocked when they were telling me, oh, I should ship, some given handles that I had made, even when I was like, I obviously should not ship them. Like they are so obviously not acceptable. But this other person was like convinced that they were, and it's like that's insane. Like to me, like that difference in outlook on it. And
Have we talked? And I won't let you finish, but I'm gonna bookmark a comment here, but please do finish.
no, go ahead.
I think, and it took a while for me. It took a lot of you kind of bringing up examples before this one finally came back to mind. The paper stuffing incident.
Oh,
I think we had talked about this a while ago, but that has got to have been the probably one of the most egregious examples of quality being completely disregarded. And unfortunately, it was one that wouldn't really be immediately found out until the knife was taken apart. The fact that
can you give people a rundown on sort of what the paper stuffing incident is?
Sure can. So the paper stuffing incident revolved around a maker by the name of I Am Not a Real Boy. In this case, there was a Zenpin Bao song that he was being produced, and I mean, I looked at it. I looked at the knife, and I kind of had seen some issues outside of the Zenpin issue, but it later came to light that these were hidden Zenpins, that the kind of cutout area in the handle where the Zenpin goes into had such bad tolerances, and this was not an isolated incident, but it had such bad tolerances that he was stuffing paper into that hole so that it would have or appear to have better tolerances.
Well, it's not. It's actually a little bit. Just kind of make one correction.
Yep, please do.
It wasn't actually the holes that had the tolerance issue. It was the Zenpin dowel that he was putting in, because it was actually just literally like a piece of steel rod that he had picked up from like Ace or something and had like cut with, hell if I know, a Dremel. I don't know. And like and you could tell because of the discoloration of it that it had been cut with some type of abrasive tool. And if like the length of that was so not consistent that he had to put stuff paper in. And what's depressing is you can go on McMaster-Carr and get a shit ton of like proper length dowels that you can put in for almost nothing. If you just buy the cheapest options they have as far as material goes, it's probably good enough. At least he would say it would be good enough. And it doesn't have the same issue, you know?
To me, that is, but see, what kills me about that, and this is what kind of kills me about the community sometimes is, and there's other factors outside of that. Let's be very clear. There are overseas shenanigans that go on there that I'm not just making accusations. There have been comments from the guy himself, so I also want to make that clear. But aside from those shenanigans, I mean, just to me, there's some people, and I don't want to say all the people, because there were some people that I'm sure were mad about it, but they look at it and they're like, okay, but it was cheaper than these other ones. It was more affordable. It's like, okay, well, if you're okay with those quality sacrifices, and I think those are pretty big quality sacrifices. Even that single issue around the Zen pin, that is, to me, that's just that's non-negotiable for me. If I knew in advance, like if someone told me, hey, that battle song you're gonna be buying, right? Yeah, the Zen pins don't fit properly, and as a compromise, we're gonna reduce the price a little bit here, but we're gonna stuff it with paper. What do you think? They're like, no, fix it. Just fix it. How much would it cost for you to fix the problem so that this problem doesn't exist?
Right. Well, here's the other thing. People are like, oh, it's a cheaper price point. I'm telling you right now, it's not that much cheaper. Okay. I know what it costs to make stuff. And I don't remember exactly the pricing and all that he had in it, but I know at the time when I looked at it, it's like, yeah, no, for that price, you should not have paper in the Zen pins unless it's $100 bills wadded up. Okay. So that's it's just not acceptable in my opinion, right? Like I know there's plenty of people that like defend it, but I don't know, man. That's a little bit of a stretch for me. Like that's
Well, I think this is a good talking point here is bias in terms of when it comes to quality and accepting certain quality sacrifices. And this kind of goes back to the cult mentality, but outside of the cult mentality, let's be very clear when we talk about what this bias is, in that I don't think any person, and I would put myself in that category, wants to accept the fact that they made a poor purchase decision. I don't want to think about the fact that I might have just thrown $300 out the window and bought something that was garbage quality. I'd rather ignore those issues and be like, this was a good purchase, or maybe soften the blow a little bit and say, yeah, but I like it. So what does it matter? Why do you have to interject with what I like? Why do you have to come in here and tell me what to like and what not to like? And there's that bias that comes into play where, because I bought it, it is good. That is the logic that I think a lot of people follow, and it's kind of, it creates these weird situations where fragrant quality issues are allowed.
flagrant.
Yes, I used that word. I've used quite a few.
Well, I said flagrant, not fragrant. Or did
Oh,
you look? I'm implying that you're a dummy face.
I think everyone listening knows what I meant.
I know. I'm just poking fun, dude.
um, but it's these issues are allowed to persist because there is that bias, and I think a lot of people don't want to admit it because let's be honest. Let's be honest. $100 for a knife is kind of a lot to spend for one single knife. $200, even more. You start getting to 300, 400, that's you're talking about literal car payments. That could be a car payment, that could be a student loan payment, whatever. Or that could be a whole month of really good eating out. Well, maybe not eating out, but really good eating, like cooking your own food. You could be getting some really good meals. And so I don't think anyone really wants to come up and admit that, yeah, no, that was dumb. Or when they do, it's usually after trying out some different knives, being around the community for a bit longer, having something to compare it to. And that's probably the most important piece, having something to compare it to, or having material. And by material, I mean like videos or articles talking about the issue so that there's something for them to kind of grapple with, instead of people just angrily kind of being like, no, you dummy. Like, didn't you know that was crap? Like, didn't you know? And then people get all defensive when it goes down that way.
Yeah, I think it's also like it's an in-group thing as far as defending some of these people goes.
Well, yeah, there's that too. But I'm saying even outside of that in group, just I don't want to accept the fact that I made a dumb purchase.
No, I know what you're saying. I was just expanding on it in that that's part of the problem that Reddit has and Facebook has, and to some extent Instagram. Like, they're each kind of their own community, and there's some kind of like pecking order on all of them. And it's like, to be a part of the group, you have to, one, buy into that social hierarchy, and two, you can't challenge the narrative put forth by said leaders in the group, right? Like, and it's just kind of, it's ridiculous, and you find it with all sorts of hobbies.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't think that's exclusive to Battle Songs. And again, man, there's been a lot of future good topics where really community interaction, just talking about the different forums or platforms that people can interact with, really would be an interesting topic, because there are a lot of discrepancies, and kind of the thing that people forget about it is that these different groups, a lot of times, whenever it's like, okay, well, why do these people feel this way, or why did they react this way? It's just, if you were armed with the knowledge beforehand, you might have just made the choice not to join the group, or maybe you just said, "Wow, that actually sounds like a great group. Let me go ahead and go there." It's just, not knowing is actually probably the biggest barrier to finding the right group. Because I think within the Battlesong community, I think most of the groups you could want have been fleshed out realistically. Yes, there could probably be room for some shifts in where people could go. Yeah, maybe a couple new groups could come and go, or kind of fill in the role of two, or maybe fill in a role that all the groups are missing. There's room for there to be more groups, but overall, it's just a matter of really finding the one that's gonna give you the best interactions, at least initially, and then you can decide from there what works well and what doesn't.
Right. Yeah, I think as far as quality goes,
Yeah, back to the point.
we can have, like, I feel, I don't know that we've covered, exactly, like, to the extent that I want to, Battle Song quality, and it's partially just because, I didn't have time to come up with like a whole outline. But I'll also, like, I think we should do it again as some future topic, and I'll get some microscope pictures and stuff beforehand, so I'm not trying to do it live, because I was not expecting the number of issues that I had. But yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think it's something we could definitely revisit. Overall, I think there's a lot of points that could be gleaned from what we talked about, where really just and on top, what we talked about on top of our last podcast, and I'm really going to try and sell that last podcast. It has been chunked out into parts that you can digest very easily. Please go check those out if you have not already. But with these two topics that we have talked about, I really feel like, as a buyer, you are, if you've been listening, you would be way more well equipped to make a good decision for a purchase than someone who has not listened to anything we've talked about. I would say odds would be in your favor to make a good purchase decision. So I think there's definitely more that we could talk about. I know Blade Steel, I mean, that is definitely something to consider with quality. There are some other things we could dive into a little bit more. We kind of didn't talk too much about, like, how would I word it? Trying to word this properly. Even some decisions in, like, screws. I know there's some people actually get into arguments about titanium versus steel. So there's more to be fleshed out, but I think we did a really good job of capturing the finer details. Because, like, the latch, that's pretty easy to spot, and the screw issue, I mean, unless you really want to have anodized screws, like, they're usually just going to be those steel screws.
They should almost always be steel screws. Like, if they're not anodized, they should not be titanium. Unless you're doing it for like a dive knife or something, where there's some other reason where you need the corrosion resistance.
Yeah. So, and that is a good point, because I have seen, I'm like, wouldn't that be softer, and wouldn't that over time degrade a little bit more?
Well, not just that, titanium has a very strong alloying tendency with all sorts of other metals. And so when you are screwing in, right, those threads are contacting on the two sides, and that's going to scrape off the oxidation layer. And actually, I forgot to go into anodizing a bit, but anyway, it scrapes off that oxidation layer, and so you're exposing like just raw titanium underneath, and that's going to want to bind, like it's going to want to start galling and you know, like sticking to stuff. Titanium is not good for that. You know, and so there's that. I will say with anodizing, like it should be a consistent color all the way across. You know, like there shouldn't be splotches, there shouldn't be scratches. You know, like like I think a lot of people they don't have high enough standards when it comes to anodizing.
Oh, I agree with that. I've seen examples where like the splotchiness is probably the worst offender for me. I can overlook someone calling it a fade. And when it wasn't intentionally one, I can overlook that. But the splotches, like noticeable splotches that definitely were not supposed to be there, no, no.
Right, that should never be the case with a titanium thing, because the reality is if you're going to sit there and spend the money and time making them titanium and have the corresponding increase in price, there isn't a justification for having a slightly lower price because you have splotchy anodizing. Like, it should never be a combination. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, if it's going to be anodized titanium, it should be anodized well.
Definitely agreed there.
You know? But that's its own traumatizing topic, what with me and my anodizing experiences the past few months. You know? But
I think we did a really good job between this video and the last video, and there are points. Actually, there's points on both videos that can be revisited, but I think we did a pretty good job shedding some light to issues that, especially for someone new, these may not be things that they immediately think of. So I'm again gonna pitch this video. If you know someone who's looking to buy a balisong, might be great to show them this video and the last one. To kind of make them a more informed buyer. They could skip around to whatever time points they want. I'm sure something can be gleaned from what we have to say.
right. And, you know, theoretically, we'll do another stream with better examples.
With any luck. I said with any luck.
Yeah. You know, because I think that would be better. You know, it would just be easier to understand, you know what I mean, when you have a good visual aid, as opposed to this one where I'm like trying to describe it, but it's kind of complicated. Like it was not as easy to describe some of the stuff as I thought, you know, like in a visual sense. So
yeah, we were definitely doing a little bit of mental gymnastics there.
And I'm not good at gymnastics. I usually just fall down and like go splat. So that's kind of, you guys witnessed that. So yeah.
I think. All right. Are we putting this into a burrito? Is this a wrap?
I prefer tacos. Is that okay?
I'll settle on a crunch wrap.
Come
on, man. Crunch wrap supreme. Come on.
Fine. Okay, but next time it's a taco. Deal?
Next time it's a taco. I'll make that deal.
A hard shell taco. None of that
Yeah, it's
stupid
gotta have
limp.
crunch. Yeah, of course, it's gotta have crunch.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Glad we could agree on that. So yeah. Cool.
All right. Well, thank
Peace.
you. Yep. Thank you to everyone that joined, and I guess we'll see you next time.
Later.
Bye bye.